Is my five sensory ex-coworker playing a game on me as a sixth sensory? So today I'm talking about my client who's agreed to share her story about an ex-coworker who's five sensory and was playing a game on her. And here's how she handled it. So my client has recently left her job. She found the atmosphere too toxic. And so she got the courage to up and leave. And now she's looking for another job and she needs references. So this is what happened. She had thought she was close to this former coworker of hers and she was going to ask him for a reference. He's a five sensory, of course. And she asked him to have it submitted by a certain deadline. And she asked a week in advance of the deadline. And so it's getting closer to the last minute and he still hasn't submitted the reference yet with all of the details that her potential employer has asked of her. So she asked me, what should she do? She realizes that the five sensory ex-coworker is probably playing a game on her, which is correct. And she was wondering, how can she deal with this? How can she find another way to get a reference in at the last minute? And I basically said to her, don't count on this ex-coworker. Even though he seemed like he was close to you before and would give you a good reference, find somebody else, even if it's somebody you don't know that well, and see if they're willing to give you the reference and follow your intuition to find who that safe person is. And you may have never even talked to them before or barely know them. And so she followed my advice. She found another person she could use as a reference. And then she submitted that reference with that person instead of the ex-coworker. And then the ex-coworker did come through at the last minute, but what she did instead was she said, oh, I already submitted my references and I used this person and they praised me really highly and I really appreciated their help. The interesting thing that happened next was then that ex-coworker became very accusatory and asked why my client hadn't followed up with him and she had gone ahead and asked somebody else for a reference other than him. So he got a little bit insecure. And the interesting thing was, she said, well, I thought my instructions were pretty clear and that you just needed more time to work on it and that you were busy. Here's what I suspect as an outsider, and I don't know this for sure, but this is what my intuition is telling me, is that this coworker was hoping that my client would come to him and beg him for his help. And then he would have the power and control to ask her to do what he wanted. I don't know at this point if my client actually got that job that she applied for using these references, but what I do know for sure, as she has reported to me after submitting these references for this job, is that this ex-coworker has now become a very enthusiastic reference for her. In fact, he is her biggest cheerleader who wants to back her up on her employment journey and give her all kinds of positive reviews about her work in the last workplace. So even though she had some toxic relationships going on in that old workplace before, now it's looking very positive and she's all covered in terms of whatever happened in that particular workplace. I wanted to share this story with you because as six sensories, we sometimes feel very stuck in our current workplace, especially if it's toxic, and we're scared to leave because it's like, who's going to give us a positive reference? Who's really going to support me getting the next job? But you would be surprised who comes out of the woodwork to help you when you lean into your intuition that is egging you on to leave the job and to find that support. You'd be surprised where support comes from, even if some people appear to be withdrawing. One of the keys to successfully navigating change is to be aware that other people around you may freak out and you can't be infected by their energy when they are choosing to freak out or they are choosing to play a game on you. If they're trying to ignore you to get their way in some way or another, you have to be prepared for that when you're dealing with people as a sixth sensory. And if you're prepared and you're aware of the games and you know why people are ignoring you and that it's a way for them to get power and get their own needs met, then all you need to do is just leave these people alone when they're engaging in those power games. And everybody does this from time to time. It's almost impossible to completely get away from politics and power games. Although maybe if you work from home and you purely make your income online, you might get 100% away. But having said that, even then, you may have to collaborate with people at some point, and it's possible you may have a relationship where somebody is playing a game on you. And it's very important to set boundaries in a lot of creative ways when you encounter the games. Doesn't necessarily mean you cut everybody out every time they play one game. You can kind of be quiet and let them be when they are playing a game. That's a really good strategy to let them know that they have fallen off track, but without really cutting the relationship completely. But if people keep bringing you games, if you've given them space and then they come back to you with another game and then another game and then another game, then definitely don't be afraid to cut people out of your life who are behaving badly. So my client asked me a really interesting question about this situation. She was actually getting ready to say goodbye to this ex-coworker and basically that I'm moving on to another workplace and we won't be keeping in touch, when he wasn't responding properly at first with the reference letter that she'd asked for. And then he did respond, but just in a very last minute fashion, just before she was able to send that goodbye text. And then she changed her mind at this point. She thought, I'll just leave him in my life. Maybe he will give me more good references in the future, and I won't say goodbye to him right now. But then she asked me an interesting question when she explained this, and she said, why would my ex-coworker even play this game in the first place? Why would he risk our relationship when I could potentially give him a good reference or help him out in some way down the road? And I answered that it's because he's not even aware that there are consequences to this game that he's playing because it's worked so often. He's probably played it on other people and gotten his way with other ex-coworkers, and maybe that's the way he gets attention and validation from women in his life, you know? And she responded back that she couldn't believe that somebody would just play a game in order to get what they wanted and really risk relationships that way. So when people play games, it's typically because they've worked before and they're not expecting a sixth sensory like you or I to see through it. But when we're aware of the games and we see through them, we know not to freak out. We know to stay calm, and we're good at being calm in the first place. And then we surprise people when we don't fall into the trap of playing their games. That's when they're quite shocked, and then they see us in a new light. Now you might say to me, Leah, I can't anticipate every single game that's going to happen in my life. How do I know that something is a game and I'm not going to fall into the trap of it? So basically, if something is going on, like somebody's behaving in some way and it feels nasty, but you don't really know how to call them out on it, you don't really know how to pinpoint exactly what they did wrong or how to criticize it, you just have this yucky feeling that something bad is going on in your intuition, that's a sign that somebody is playing a game. So you can kind of think about it and think, what kind of game are they playing? Why are they doing this? And what's the result they're really trying to get? Are they trying to get something from me? Some kind of energy, some kind of validation, intimacy? Are they trying to get money? Could be a lot of things. But usually it's a game of manipulation where they're trying to get something from you when you feel that yucky feeling and you're not sure why somebody's behaving the way that they are and you don't know how to call them out on it. So that's the way you can kind of backtrack the process and think it through and understand what the outcome is that they're trying to go after. And once you've figured that out, you can respond in a very calm and rational way and find a different way to meet your own needs if you're expecting something from them. For any of this advice on games to work though, there's one more crucial element that you need to consider in order for it to really happen the way that you want. You need to have the courage to walk away from the situation. If you're not courageous to walk away, then you'll always be the victim of somebody else's games. You won't ever be able to get out of it because you're always hoping for something from the other person rather than finding more productive ways to meet your own needs. If you're going to get into any kind of long-term business or personal relationship, you have to be discerning and really observe people's behavior. You have to judge whether or not they behave with integrity, because if they don't, then they're going to play their games and their manipulations on you sooner or later.